Monsters, cryptids, demons, whatever you believe in, whatever you want to call them, it's clear that there are creatures stalking the forests, lakes, and oceans that we simply don't understand. But some of them could be explained by shady government projects. These are the top 10 unsettling creatures created from secret government experiments. The Goat Man has become a big part of the local lore in Maryland, a half-man, half-goat being who roams the woods, particularly around Tucker Road in Clinton and Fletchertown Road in Bowie. Said to be the result of a botched science experiment. The stories really picked up in the early 70s, but some of the rumors go all the way back to the late 30s. Locals reported mysterious disappearances of dogs, which some blamed on a goat creature. Now, of course, some think the dogs might have just fallen victim to trains passing through the area, but that did not stop the tales from spreading. The Goat Man is often described as having a human-like face, but covered in hair. Some say it looks like a hairy humanoid. Others picture it more of a human with goat legs, almost like a faun from Greek mythology. The creature was rumored to live in makeshift shelters deep in the woods and was said to attack anything it came across, including pets and people. A popular story is that the Goat Man was once a scientist named Dr. Stephen Fletcher, who worked at the nearby Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. Legend has it that a freak experiment with goats transformed him into whatever this beast is. Folklorist Barry Pearson notes that the legend really took off in 1971, when a dog's death was blamed on Goatman. Bored young folks kept the tale alive, claiming the creature liked to haunt local lovers' lanes. But with all these eerie tales floating around, it's no wonder the Goatman has become a local fixture in Maryland folklore. Next up, we have the Shaver mystery. Richard Sharp Shaver was an American pulp writer who got a lot of attention in the years following World War II. He wrote stories for sci-fi magazines like Amazing Stories. But the thing is, his stories weren't just fiction, at least according to him. Shaver claimed that there was an ancient civilization living underground with advanced technology, and that the government had been hiding their existence for years. This is stuff you're probably familiar with if you watch this channel frequently. Now, he even said he had actual encounters with these beings he called the Deros, short for detrimental robots, who were supposed to be these twisted, degenerate humans who'd gone off the deep end over the centuries. According to Shaver, they kidnapped people from the surface for food and used some sort of mind control tech to mess with people's heads. The whole thing kicked off when Shaver sent a letter to Amazing Stories in 1943, claiming that he discovered an ancient language called Mantong, which he said was the basis for all human languages. Ray Palmer, the magazine's editor, was just very interested in all this, and he published Shaver's stories. One titled I Remember Lemuria blew up and sold out immediately. And for a few years, about 3/4 of the magazine was just Shaver's tales. Some fans were totally into it. Others thought that these were just ridiculous hoaxes. Obviously, the stories themselves were wild, but Shaver himself seemed to be highly paranoid and odd. But even after the magazine dropped his stories, the Shaver mystery didn't just go away. The stuff he wrote about influenced plenty of stories that came later and added to the popularity of conspiracies like the Hollow Earth theory. Whether that's a good thing or not, I'll let you guys be the judge of. Operation Sea Spray was an absolutely insane US Navy experiment that went down in 1950 and was kept secret for over 2 decades. The Navy wanted to see how vulnerable a major city like San Francisco would be to a biological attack, so they decided to test this out in the most blunt way possible by spreading bacteria everywhere. From September 20th to the 27th, they sprayed 2 types of bacteria, and Bacillus globigii over the Bay Area. The military thought that these bacteria were harmless to humans, apparently. They released the bacteria from a ship offshore, and based on their monitoring, they figured that pretty much every one of San Francisco's 800,000 residents at the time inhaled at least 5,000 particles of it. Of course, this dose was concerning because it fell within the range of infectivity for anthrax. Just a few weeks later, on October 11th, 1950, 11 people checked into Stanford Hospital with strange urinary tract infections. I wonder why. Although most recovered, one man who had recently had prostate surgery ended up dying from a heart valve infection. Doctors were really puzzled and even wrote a paper about it, since these kinds of infections were pretty rare. Interestingly, there were also reports of pneumonia spikes in the city after the bacteria was released. Surprise, surprise, but the army never warned local health authorities about this biological blanket they dropped on the area. It wasn't until years later, during Senate hearings in 1977, that army officials finally admitted to the tests, and they took no responsibility for the spike in health issues. In the years since, there were whispers, though, that these experiments may have inadvertently created mutant creatures. Over the years, some locals said they spotted strange animals that didn't quite look right. Reports of bizarre-looking fish and odd behavior in animals around the bay became more frequent. Most scientists just shrugged off these claims as hoaxes, but the connection between the secretive tests and the appearance of mutated creatures left a lot of people uneasy. Back in 2014, scientists at the University of Rochester Medical Center did something pretty wild. They injected human brain cells into lab mice. They took these glial cells, which support cells in the brain, and put them right into mice's brains. Over time, those human cells started to mix with the mice's own brain cells, and that's when things got interesting. The result? The modified mice ended up having better memory than the normal mice. In experiments, when the researchers played a sound, they followed it with a tiny electrical shock. Well, the mice with human cells remembered the sound way better than the regular mice. When the sound was played, the mice with the human brain cells suddenly became more alert. They remembered being shocked. The normal mice just went about like nothing was wrong. While improving mouse memory does sound cool, it does raise some serious ethical questions. Is it okay to mess with animals' brains like this? And what about the fact that they were using electric shocks to test them? It does make you wonder, where do we draw the line? Plus, if we keep pushing these boundaries, we might end up creating something that blurs the lines between species, and then we'd have a whole list of other moral conundrums to deal with. One of the most unsettling experiments in history was conducted by Vladimir Demikov, a Soviet scientist who started experimenting with dogs in the 1950s. One of his experiments involved surgically attaching the head of one dog onto the body of another, creating a creature with two functioning heads. Demikov had wanted to push the boundaries of organ transplantation and understand how the body would react to such a drastic alteration. Obviously, the ethical implications here were huge. The dog didn't survive long after the surgery, suffering from a host of health issues, and a lot of people at the time, and still today, when hearing about it, are just kinda sickened by it. I mean, sure, Demikov's experiments were groundbreaking in a medical sense, but the entire concept of creating a two-headed dog in a lab just feels like something out of a horror movie rather than legitimate research. In 2003, researchers in Shanghai created the first successful human-animal hybrid, often referred to as Rabbit Man. This involved fusing human cells with rabbit eggs, resulting in embryos that were part human and part rabbit. Yikes. Now, this wasn't the first attempt at a hybrid like this. Scientists in the US had been trying to create animal-human combinations for years, but hadn't really gotten anywhere with it. The Shanghai team, though, managed to develop embryos with a strikingly high percentage of human DNA, making these hybrids more human than rabbit. The goal was to explore stem cell research and the potential for organ transplants, but after just a few days of development, the embryos were destroyed and their stem cells were harvested. This led to some debate about the morality of creating life only to end it for scientific purposes. Plus, mixing human DNA with animals just feels creepy to a lot of folks. Not quite as blatantly messed up as the two-headed dog thing, but the concept of a rabbit man kind of sends shivers down my spine. I don't think that's something I'd ever actually want to see in real life, you know? In 2007, researchers at Yale conducted an experiment that involved injecting human neural stem cells into 5 monkeys suffering from Parkinson's disease. They wanted to see if these human cells could help alleviate the symptoms of their condition, and amazingly, the results were actually pretty promising. After the treatment, the monkeys had improvements. They were able to walk, eat, and move a lot better, and their tremors decreased without any adverse side effects like tumors or toxicity. The human neural cells didn't just coexist with the monkeys' brain cells. They actually survived and migrated within the monkeys' brains, changing how their brains functioned. So the question was, how many human cells could be integrated into a monkey's brain before it just fundamentally altered the creature? If these monkeys began to exhibit behavior that seemed more human, what exactly would we have on our hands? It's a lot to think about. Now let's dive into the world of wholphins, which are hybrids born from a female bottlenose dolphin and a male false killer whale. The first wholphin was found in 1981 at Tokyo SeaWorld. Sadly, it only lived for about 200 days. These hybrids are pretty much only found in marine parks and aquariums though, places that have a pretty terrible reputation for how they treat their animals, and aside from the ethical concerns of marine parks themselves, wholphins face a whole host of health issues. Like most hybrids, they tend to have higher mortality rates and deal with psychological and behavioral problems. Mixing genetic material from two different species can create a lot of complications. These creatures just aren't designed to thrive like their parent species are, and their quality of life often takes a hit because of it. And the wild wholphins can't really exist naturally. The geographical behavioral differences between false killer whales and bottlenose dolphins make it nearly impossible for them to mate outside of captivity. So when humans breed things like this, it's a serious disruption of the natural order. So this messed up thing was dubbed the River Kovashi alien. In 1996, whatever this thing was washed up on the banks of the River Kovashi in Russia, and nobody had any idea what they were looking at. With the Leningrad nuclear power plant nearby though, some speculated that the creature might have been mutated by radioactive waste leaking into the river. Now, at first many thought it could be a mutant chicken embryo, but it didn't have any wings. Experts from the Institute of Biophysics examined it, but they also couldn't determine what it actually was. In March of 1956, something pretty messed up happened in the New Mexico desert near Holloman Air Force Base. Air Force Sergeant Jonathan Lovett and Major William Cunningham were out looking for debris from a rocket test when they came across a scene that would haunt them forever. Cunningham apparently heard a scream and rushed to find Lovett. Instead of an expected snake bite, he saw Lovett being pulled into a hovering silver disc by what looked like a long serpentine arm. The disc hovered about 15 to 20 feet off the ground, and before Cunningham could process what the hell he was seeing, it just shot up into the sky, with Lovett still inside. Terrified, Cunningham ran back to his Jeep to call for help. Security teams arrived, and while they took Cunningham to the base hospital, search parties were set out to find Lovett. 3 days later, they discovered his body. About 10 miles from the site, it was nude and severely mutilated. The autopsy couldn't provide any clear answers about what had happened. Years later, two men, William Cooper and former Green Beret Captain William English, claimed that they'd seen official reports on the incident, even though the government has consistently denied any record of it. With all that said though, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.